Hi guys, Dan here from Canada Abroad, and thanks so much for tuning in. Today we are going to be talking about one of the more popular topics for people out there, and that is provincial nominations. So as many people have heard in the last few weeks, the government has said that they do not expect that they'll be doing any federal skilled worker or Canadian experience class draws in the next 6 to 12 months. And they do anticipate when they resume draws that you're going to need a comprehensive ranking system score around 500. So obviously a lot of people who are in the express entry system or were looking to get into the express entry system now know that they're not going to be selected in the near future, or they might have to significantly increase their comprehensive ranking system score in order to be chosen. So obviously one of the best ways to go about this is with a provincial nomination. Number one, depending on if it's linked to express entry or not, it could give you 600 extra points on your comprehensive ranking system score. And with express entry, they are still doing draws for provincial nominees every 2 weeks. So this is one of the quicker ways still to get your permanent residence. Now, each province in Canada has different programs and different requirements. So we couldn't do one video with every single program included because there's just too many and that video would be way too long. So what we're doing is we're breaking it up province by province. So we are going to be releasing a video for each province, and it will contain all of the different programs available within that specific province. So for today, we are going to be focusing on Ontario and the Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program. Now, when we look at these three categories for Ontario, there's going to be three main categories. One is for the programs or streams that are linked directly to express entry. So that means that you're going to have an express entry profile in order to be considered. Then the second group is what we call the expression of interest programs. And for these ones, you don't need to have an express entry profile. And then the last category that we will look at is for those who are looking at starting or purchasing a business in Ontario. So it is going to be a long video, so I have added chapters below. So you can skip ahead to the sections that you're most interested in, or if you don't know about any of the programs, you can listen and see which one might be applicable to you. But as I said, we're going to start off with the programs that are tied directly to express entry. Now, for the express entry linked programs, there are three different programs that we're going to be looking at, but one of them has a sub-program, so you can kind of think of it as four different programs if you want to. The first one is what we call the Human Capital Priority Stream, and this one's probably been the most popular for people looking for a provincial nomination. So for this one, you have to be in the express entry system with a valid profile. And on the profile, when it asks you which provinces you're willing to live and work in, you had to either say Ontario or you had to say all. And then there would have been a second question asking if you were willing to share your information with Ontario, and you would have need to have said yes. If you didn't do those two steps, then Ontario is not going to be able to look at your profile and consider you for this program. Now, with the Human Capital Priority Stream, what they do is they have two types of draws that they do. One is for priority occupations, and the other one is a tech-specific draw. So for the first one, what they do is when they select people, there will be a list of certain occupation codes that they're looking for, and they will first identify anybody whose primary NOC code matched their list. And then they will take the highest ranking candidates, typically. So what they'll say is, in today's draw, we picked these 12 different occupation codes. And of the people picked, they had a comprehensive ranking system score between X and Y. So the main thing here is, as long as you're in the express entry and you've declared you're interested in Ontario and you shared your profile, you can be considered. But then what happens is you, number one, have to have work experience in one of the codes that they've picked in that draw. And your comprehensive ranking system score has to be within the specific range that they're looking for. So the list of occupations, we saw it change a few times last year. And you can find the information on the Ontario website, but we also have posted it on our website above, so you can take a look at the list of occupations that was being picked most recently. But again, it can change from draw to draw. But in terms of the comprehensive ranking system score, one of the odd things that they're doing here is we thought that they were picking the highest ranked candidates, but what they keep doing is they're picking the highest ranked candidates with scores just under what the federal government last picked in an express entry draw. So what we mean by this is if you have a score of 500, you're not going to get picked because your score is too high. Because what Ontario has been doing with all of the draws that are linked to express entry profiles, they're taking people with scores up to 467. So anyone with a score above 467 hasn't been picked by Ontario in the last year. And this lines up with the last express entry draw that they did for federal skilled workers, where you needed a score of 468 or higher. So it remains to be seen this year if they're going to change that, because if they know that the federal government is not going to be picking federal skilled workers, are they going to start picking people with higher scores, or are they going to leave it? So to kind of give you an example of what I'm talking about is the last draw that they did for the human capital priority stream. The applicants that they pick had a score anywhere between 464 and 467. So basically anyone who had the experience needed in one of the occupation codes listed, and also their comprehensive ranking system score was between 464 and 467, then they could have been selected by Ontario. But they do say that they can't there might be too many people and they can't pick everybody. So even if you met that criteria, you still might not have gotten a notification of interest. So what happens is if you do meet the criteria that they're looking for on that specific day, they're going to send you a notification of interest. So you'll get a message to log into your express entry profile that you have a new message. It'll say that Ontario has identified your profile and they're interested in you, and they will give you a set timeline in which you need to create an account with the Ontario provincial government website and complete application forms and upload all of your supporting documents to prove everything on your express entry profile. They will then assess that information, and if everything is accurate and correct, then they would issue you with a provincial nomination, and that would be loaded onto your express entry profile, and you would then be given those 600 extra points. But remember, if you're going to accept this provincial nomination, you have to have the intention to live and work in Ontario. And with this program, you have to be able to show that you have enough settlement funds to support yourself and your dependent family members. So if you want to learn what that number is, you can just click the link above and it will show you the required settlement funds for this type of application. And for this stream as well, you have to have a minimum of a CLB level 7 on an approved English or French test. So the important thing just to remember is, even if you're in express entry, you've been classified under federal skilled worker or Canadian experience class, and you met those requirements, you just also have to check that you meet all the requirements for the program that you have been chosen under for Ontario. So they have their own application guide, so you just want to check through that as well to make sure that you meet all of their requirements, because like I said, sometimes people do get a notification of interest and they might not actually meet all of the criteria, and they pay the money, submit the application to Ontario, and it's refused because they didn't read through the guide fully. So if you're picked, check what you were selected under, go through the guide just to triple check that you meet all the criteria and that you're going to meet all the criteria as of the day you submit the application to Ontario. We've seen cases where someone met the requirements, but the day they submitted it to Ontario, they were all of a sudden a week short on their work experience. So always just check all of those little things before you submit your full application. So if you're in express entry as a federal skilled worker, the requirement here is a little bit different than the federal government's requirement, so it can get confusing. So if you're picked by Ontario and you're in express entry as a federal skilled worker, then what they want to see is that you have at least 1 year of experience in the NOC code that you were picked under, And that work experience has to have been in the last 5 years. So not the last 10, but the last 5 years. And when they're looking at NOC codes, they are looking at what you listed as your primary NOC code on your Express Entry profile. So even if you had experience listed under work experience, but it's not listed as your primary NOC code, then they wouldn't pick it up. So you're going to want to check your Express Entry profiles to see what your primary NOC code is as well. And with that 1 year of experience, they're going to want to see that it's continuous, so that there was no breaks or gaps in that employment. So the minimum is the 1 year of continuous experience. It could be with different employers as long as there's no gaps or breaks in between. If you're under the Canadian experience class, then with your Canadian experience, the same rules apply. The NOC code has to be the same as the primary one on your Express Entry profile. But the 1 year of Canadian experience has to have occurred in the last 3 years. And unlike with the federal skilled workers, it doesn't have to be continuous. In terms of education, you have to have a minimum of a bachelor's degree. So if you have a 3-year diploma, you might still get a notification of interest from Ontario simply because the drop-down box lists bachelor's and 3-year diploma together. But if you get that notification of interest and you only have a 3-year diploma listed on your educational credential assessment, or you did a 3-year diploma in Canada, you're not going to meet the criteria. So be careful, you have to have at least a bachelor's equivalent to be eligible for this stream. Now, within the human capital priority stream, they sometimes do draws just for tech-specific draws, is what they call them. So with this, it's for people with very specific NOC codes. And then again, they will look at your comprehensive ranking system score. So for this, the requirements are the same as human capital priorities in terms of having the Express Entry profile and identifying your interest in Ontario. But then you have to have work experience of at least a year in one of the following NOC codes. There's 2173, 2174, 2147, 2175, 2172, and 0213. So if you have the experience in one of those fields, that's the first thing that they are going to look at. And then after that, they do again look at comprehensive ranking system scores. So if we look at the last draw that they did for tech people, of the people with those NOC codes, you had to have a comprehensive ranking system score anywhere between 455 and 467. So that's again, if you have a really low comprehensive ranking system score, it's not likely that you're going to be picked through the human capital priority stream, whether it's the tech or the normal draws. Your score is just going to be too low if it's down in the 300. So as you can see, they still have been taking high comprehensive ranking system scores with these draws. Now, the third program is the French-speaking skilled worker stream. Now, for this one, again, you just have to be in the Express Entry system, identify that you're interested in Ontario, but you have to have official language results for both French and English. Now, when it comes to your French test results, you have to have a minimum of a CLB level 7 on an approved French test and a CLB level 6 on an approved English test. So that's the first main requirement that they're going to be looking at. You also have to have a minimum of a bachelor's degree. So if you are below a bachelor's degree listed on your educational credential assessment, you won't be eligible. Some people still get picked if they list a 3-year diploma because the drop-down box on the profile, the bachelor and the diploma are on the same line. So note that your education assessment actually has to say bachelor's degree. Otherwise, if you get a notification of interest and you have a diploma, if you submit that full application, it can be refused because you didn't have the bachelor's degree. And then you have to meet the requirements of either the federal skilled worker or the Canadian experience class on your Express Entry profile. So if you're in Express Entry as a federal skilled worker, the requirement here is a little bit different than the federal government's requirements, so it can get confusing. So if you're picked by Ontario and you're in Express Entry as a federal skilled worker, then what they want to see is that you have at least 1 year of experience, and that work experience has to have been in the last 5 years. So not the last 10, but the last 5 years. And with that 1 year of experience, they're going to want to see that it's continuous, so that there was no breaks or gaps in that employment. So the minimum is the 1 year of continuous experience. It could be with different employers as long as there's no gaps or breaks in between. If you're under the Canadian experience class, then with your Canadian experience, but the 1 year of Canadian experience has to have occurred in the last 3 years. And unlike with the federal skilled workers, it doesn't have to be continuous. And the same goes with this stream. If you are chosen, you will get a notification of interest on your Express Entry portal. They'll give you a letter stating that you have 45 days to submit all of your documents to Ontario. They will review them, and then if everything is in order, they would then add the provincial nomination to your profile, and that would add 600 points to your Express Entry score. And then you would also be eligible for draws in the provincial nominee rounds. Now, the last program is for skilled trades. Now, with this one, again, you have to have a valid Express Entry profile. But in addition to that, you're going to have work experience in Ontario. So if you are in trades and you were hoping this one could apply to you, unless you've actually worked in Ontario in a skilled trade, this is not for you. So if you only have foreign work experience, then you're not going to be eligible under this program. So that's just the main thing to know. So in terms of work experience, you have to have at least 1 year of work experience in a skilled trade in Ontario, and it has to have been done on a valid work permit, so with authorized status. And in terms of the trades that they're accepting, it's in anything which starts in terms of NOC codes with 633, 72, 73, or 82. So if your NOC code doesn't start with one of those digits, then it's not going to fall within this program, even if you did work inside of Ontario. Now, with that work experience, it has to have taken place in the last 2 years as of the date you submit your application to Ontario. And it also has to be in an occupation code listed on your Express Entry profile. And if the work experience that you did is in a trade that requires licensing, then you have to prove that you had the valid license while you were working in that trade as well. At the time that you submit your application, so you have to be living in Ontario and you have to be on a valid work permit at the time that you submit your application. You have to have an approved language test in either French or English, and you have to have achieved at least a CLB level 5 on that approved test. And with this program, like the others, if you are selected, Ontario will give you that notification of interest. You'll have 45 days to submit all of your documents to them. They will then review them, and if everything is in order, they will add the provincial nomination to your profile. If you accept it, it'll add the 600 points to your comprehensive ranking system score, and you will then likely be chosen in the next round for provincial nominees. So now we are going to move on, and we are going to be looking at each of the programs that uses the expression of interest system. So what this is, any expression of interest category, you don't need to have an Express Entry profile. So there are people that, don't qualify for Express Entry and they can't get into the pool. Well, it doesn't matter, because if you meet the criteria of one of the next few programs, you don't need an Express Entry profile. But what that also means then is if you do get a provincial nomination through one of the following programs, you're not going to be submitting your application for permanent residence through the Express Entry system. You're either going to be submitting it as a paper-based application, or you can submit it through the new online permanent resident portal. But the main thing is this is not going to go through the Express Entry system. So in terms of processing times, these applications can take much longer for your permanent residence to be approved as compared to ones submitted through the express entry system. So just keep that in mind. So with the programs that we are going to be starting with, we are going to start with the master's graduate program. Okay, so for this program, you need to create an expression of interest on the Ontario government website. And once you do that, you're going to be given a score based on OINP's own scoring system. And they will then select people based on those scores when they are doing draws. So it is still a draw system, and they are still going to be looking at points, but it's not tied to express entry or the comprehensive ranking system score. Now, the requirements that you have to be able to meet to fit into this category is that you have to have completed at least 1 full year of academic study in Canada, in Ontario, and you obtained your master's degree from an eligible educational institution in Ontario. You need to have a CLB level 7 or higher on an approved French or English test. You need to have lived in Ontario on valid status for at least 1 year within the 2 years before submitting your application to OINP. You have to have the intention to live and reside in Ontario. You need to either be living in Ontario or outside of Canada at the time of your application. So if you're living in a province, a Canadian province or territory other than Ontario, you're not eligible to apply. And you need to file your application within 2 years of completing your master's degree. So within 2 years of the date printed on your master's degree. Next, we're going to be looking at the PhD graduate stream. So for this stream, again, you need to have the intention to live and reside in Ontario. You need to have completed your PhD with an eligible Ontario institution, and 2 of the years of study towards that must have been completed in Ontario on a valid study permit. You need to have lived in Ontario for at least 1 year within the 2 years before submitting your application to Ontario, and it has to have been on valid status. You need to submit your application within 2 years of the date listed on your PhD degree. And with this program, you have to be able to show that you have enough settlement funds to support yourself and your dependent family members. So if you want to learn what that number is, you can just click the link above and it will show you the required settlement funds for this type of application. Okay, so next we are going to be looking at the different job offer streams. There is more than one, but these are still within the expression of interest system. So even if you do have an eligible job offer, it doesn't guarantee you a provincial nomination. You'll still have to submit your expression of interest and then be selected based on your score with that expression of interest. So the first one we're going to be looking at is the job offer stream for foreign workers. So for this one, the first requirement straight off the bat is that you have to have a full-time, permanent, paid job offer from an employer in Ontario. And full-time for this is considered anything at 30 hours per week or more. The job has to be in an occupation which is an O, A, or B level on the NOC code. The wage that you're being paid has to be in line with the median wage for your occupation in Ontario. And if you're not sure how to look this up, the government uses the Job Bank website, and they look at the region that you're going to be employed in, and they look at what the median average is of people in that occupation and what they earn. So this is to make sure that you're not getting underpaid for your work. The work has to take place primarily in Ontario. So if you're going to be working in an office outside of Ontario, it's not going to count. Your primary place of business and work has to be within Ontario. Now you have to have 2 years of directly related paid work experience within the last 5 years. So if you don't have at least 2 years of related work experience, you're not going to qualify. The only caveat here is if you're in a licensed occupation and you can show that you have an Ontario license to practice in your occupation. But if you're not in a licensed profession, then this isn't going to apply to you. You have to have the intention to live and work in Ontario. Now, in terms of the employer has to have been in business for at least 3 years prior to the submission of your application. So if it's a newer startup company, it's not going to qualify. Their business premises have to be on Ontario where you're going to be working. So if if the company doesn't have offices, then again, it might not be meeting these requirements. Now, they have to demonstrate that attempts were made to fill the position with a Canadian citizen or permanent resident. Now, this does not need to be met if you're already working in Ontario in the position on a work permit. So if you're already working for this employer, they don't need to go through the recruitment efforts. Now, the company, depending where it's based, needs to have a certain annual revenue. So if it's in the Greater Toronto Area, they need to earn at least $1 million a year. And if it's outside of the Greater Toronto Area, the business needs to earn at least $500,000 a year. And that would be their total gross annual revenue. And depending where your employer is based, they also need to have a certain amount of full-time staff. So if they're based in the Greater Toronto Area, they need to have at least 5 employees. And if they're outside of the Greater Toronto Area, they need to have at least 3 employees. And those employees need to be full-time, and they need to be either Canadian citizens or permanent residents. Now we're going to look at the employment job offer, the international student stream. So again, with this, you have to have a full-time, paid, indeterminate job offer from an Ontario employer, and full-time is 30 hours a week or more. The job has to be an OA or B level occupation. In terms of wage, though, you only have to be paid at the low wage for the position. So it's not the median wage, it's just at the low wage for your NOC code in your location. The work has to place primarily in Ontario. The applicant, so whoever's applying under the stream, them and their family cannot hold more than 10% equity in the business that has given them the job offer. Now, in terms of the employer has to have been in business for at least 3 years prior to the submission of your application. So if it's a newer startup company, it's not going to qualify. Their business premises have to be on Ontario where you're going to be working. So if the company doesn't have offices, then again, it might not be meeting these requirements. Now, they have to demonstrate that attempts were made to fill the position with a Canadian citizen or permanent resident. Now, this does not need to be met if you're already working in Ontario in the position on a work permit. So if you're already working for this employer, they don't need to go through the recruitment efforts. Now, the company, depending where it's based, needs to have a certain annual revenue. So if it's in the Greater Toronto Area, they need to earn at least $1 million a year. And if it's outside of the Greater Toronto Area, the business needs to earn at least $500,000 a year. And that would be their total gross annual revenue. And depending where your employer is based, they also need to have a certain amount of full-time staff. So if they're based in the Greater Toronto Area, they need to have at least 5 employees. And if they're outside of the Greater Toronto Area, they need to have at least 3 employees. And those employees need to be full-time, and they need to be either Canadian citizens or permanent residents. The applicant needs to have completed a degree or a diploma that took at least 2 years to complete, or a degree, diploma, or certificate that took 1 year full-time to complete, but required a degree to be admitted to the program. They have to submit their application within 2 years of the date on their issued qualification. They need to have the intention to reside in Ontario. Next, we have the employer job offer in-demand skills stream. So for this one, you do also have to have a full-time paid job offer from an eligible Ontario employer. So that means that the job has to be at least 30 hours per week. And in terms of the NOC code, only certain ones are eligible for this program. And the codes which are eligible here, they are 3413, 4412, 7441, 7511, 7521, 7611, 8431, 8432, 8611, 9462. So if your job offer is not within one of those NOC codes, you won't be able to go through this particular stream. The wage that you're being offered has to be in line with the median wage for your occupation code in the region that you're going to be working. You have to have at least 9 consecutive months of paid work experience in Ontario in the same NOC code that you have been chosen under. That work experience has to have been obtained on a valid work permit, and that work experience has to have been within the last 3 years as of the date that you submit your application to OINP. If your occupation is licensed, you need to prove that you have a license to work in that profession in Ontario. You need to have an approved language test in either French or English, and you need to get a CLB level 4 or higher. You have to have at least a minimum of a high school diploma or equivalent. You need to have the intention to live in Ontario. You need to have the settlement funds required for your family size. Now, in terms of the employer has to have been in business for at least 3 years prior to the submission of your application. So if it's a newer startup company, it's not going to qualify. Their business premises have to be on Ontario where you're going to be working. So if it's, if the company doesn't have offices, then again, it might not be meeting these requirements. Now, they have to demonstrate that attempts were made to fill the position with a Canadian citizen or permanent resident. Now, this does not need to be met if you're already working in Ontario in the position on a work permit. So if you're already working for this employer, they don't need to go through the recruitment efforts. Now, the company, depending where it's based, needs to have a certain annual revenue. So if it's in the Greater Toronto area, they need to earn at least $1 million a year. And if it's outside of the Greater Toronto area, the business needs to earn at least $500,000 a year. And that would be their total gross annual revenue. And depending where your employer is based, they also need to have a certain amount of full-time staff. So if they're based in the Greater Toronto area, they need to have at least 5 employees. And if they're outside of the Greater Toronto area, they need to have at least 3 employees. And those employees need to be full-time, and they need to be either Canadian citizens or permanent residents. Now, the last program that we are going to be looking at is the Entrepreneur Program. So this is for anybody who wants to either start a company in Ontario or purchase an existing business in Ontario. Now, the first thing to note with this specific program, it's also points-based. So what this means is you would have to put in an expression of interest based on your business plan. You'll then get scored based on that expression of interest, and then only if your score is high enough, you will be invited to apply to the program. So it's not everybody who's interested will get picked through this program. They are going to use a point system. Now, the basic requirements to be eligible for this system, I'm going to go through them now, but what you need to remember is these are the basic requirements. With any type of entrepreneur program, it is quite in-depth and detailed. So if you think that you meet these basic requirements as a first step, you're going to want to dive a little bit deeper into the different details. But what happens with these programs, and this is very important to note, is if you're picked, you don't get permanent residence right away. You're going to be issued with a work permit so that you can enter Canada and implement your business plan. Then if you implement it and you've met the criteria that you set out for yourself with OINP, then you will be allowed to apply for permanent residence. So there is a work permit first before you're going to get to the permanent residence. So it's just important to note that as well. Now you need to have the intention to start the business in Ontario. And then depending what part of Ontario you want to open this business or purchase your business in, there's going to be different requirements. So the first thing that they are going to look at is your net worth. If you're going to be operating, so purchasing or starting a business in the Greater Toronto Area, your net worth has to be at least $800,000 Canadian. If it's outside of that area, it needs to be $400,000 Canadian. Then in terms of the investment amount, if it's going to be in the Greater Toronto Area, you need to invest at least $600,000 Canadian. But if it's out of the Greater Toronto Area, you only need to invest $200,000 Canadian. Or if you're going to be opening or purchasing a business in the technology or digital communications, then it doesn't matter where you're opening the business, the required investment is only going to be $200,000. You need to be in control of at least 1/3 of the equity of the business. If you're going to be operating in the Greater Toronto Area, you need to create 2 full-time jobs for Canadian citizens or permanent residents. But if you're operating either outside of the Greater Toronto Area, or again, your business is going to be in the communications, technology, and digital communications sector, you only have to create 1 job. You need to have at least 24 months of related experience in the past 60 months, so fairly recent, as a business owner or a senior manager. If you're going to be purchasing an existing business, so not just starting something up from scratch, you need to make what's called an exploratory visit to Ontario in the 12 months preceding your application to the program. And there's certain businesses that are not eligible through the program. So if you want to open a certain type of business, it might not be allowed. So just some examples of what's not allowed here is automated car washes, holding companies, laundromats, pawnbrokers, payday loans, scrap metal recycling, tire recycling, and there's some about existing franchises depending where you're going to be opening it, gas stations, bed and breakfast. So once you have a business idea, you're going to want to check that it's not on the ineligible list. And then once you have your business concept, okay, or you know what business you want to purchase, then you're going to want to go through the point system to see how your business plan is going to fare. You could sort of do a mock-up of what your score would be, and then you're going to want to compare it to the scores that have been selected for other entrepreneurs recently to see if you have a good chance of being selected or not. So that is what I would suggest as your starting point if you're looking at this type of program. And if you need to know more about the point system and how those scores are allocated, you can just click on the link above to read about those details. So now we've gone through all of the different programs. We started with the ones that are tied to express entry. Then we looked at the ones that require expressions of interest. And then we finished it off with the entrepreneur program. So as I said, we couldn't do all provinces today, but we will be releasing a video on each of the different provinces in the next few weeks. So be sure to subscribe to the channel if you want to stay up to date when those videos are released. But thank you guys so much as always for tuning in, and we will see you in our next video where we are going to be going through the British Columbia Provincial Nominee Program.